I am an invisible man. This is one of the most famous lines that you've probably read in one of your classes. This comes from Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. And I'm bringing this up because I think it's a great example of how a line can become really memorable, even if it's pretty short. This video is about hooks for essays, how you can open your essay in your first couple of sentences before you get to your thesis. But in order to show you what an effective hook looks like for an academic essay, I think it's helpful to turn to literature. So I've included a couple more examples that you can see in front of you. One, I'm sure you all know, it comes from Harry Potter. I think this idea of they established that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much, is calling into question how normal the Dursleys actually are and makes us kind of curious about if something magical or bizarre or abnormal is going to happen. And I think that thank you very much adds a little bit of humor there and gives us a sense of what the Dursleys value. So this example I think is kind of cool because it's establishing some of the theme of the book and the tone of the book as well. The next one comes from The Handmaid's Tale, and this is using a totally different strategy, but it's another really memorable opening line. We slept in the room in what had once been the gymnasium, and then she goes on to describe all of those elements of the gym that are still there, the basketball court, the varnished wood, but then leaves us wondering, why are the nets gone? Why does it say had once been a gymnasium? Why are there lines on the floor that used to be painted there, but now it's being used for something else? So this one is establishing that dystopian tone, and there's something kind of eerie about the fact that the nets have been removed. It's both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, and I think really pulls us in with this visual. Then the last one, my heroes were hidden from me. This one is also really short and simple, but I love the alliteration there, the repetition of the H sound, and then also the use of passive voice, which is generally not considered the best voice to use in writing. I think here is really intentional and meaningful. Who hid the heroes? Why? Who were this person's heroes? So these are just a few examples of what I think are some really great opening lines of fiction that you can use for inspiration. Let's talk about strategies for your essay. Well, obviously for an academic essay, your hook might look a little bit different, but you want it to be engaging. You want to think about what other students who are given a similar prompt, or if you're writing just for yourself, what other writers who are given a similar task, what they're going to say, and maybe depart from that. These are the few moments that you have to really pull the reader in. So you want to make them memorable and distinct, and you want to make sure that your own personal voice is coming through. So I'm going to give you a couple of strategies, but of course, there are multiple other strategies that are not listed in this video. In an era of slop, to use the term of the moment, it's easy to come up with a generic kind of obvious hook or just kind of contextualize the issue in a really broad sense. I recommend steering clear of that and using one of these strategies. And the first couple, I think, are really effective. So an anecdote is a very short, usually personal story, or it can be a story about someone else. We're human beings. Stories are the most fundamental part of who we are. We respond to stories, but it's got to be an engaging, interesting story, maybe an unexpected story. And of course, you're going to have to make it relate to your thesis and your overall argument. A vivid description, the Atwood example that we just looked at does that. Start off with something really visceral, evoke the five senses. After all, we're humans and bodies who use our senses, so pull us in that way, right? So whether it's a beautiful description of something that's related to your topic, or let's say you're talking about the college application process, rather than starting off kind of in an abstract way, talking about test scores and essays and letters of recommendation, why not talk about how your body felt as you took a standardized test, right? And how the sweat dripped down your back and how your fingers were shaking and how they were sticking to the paper, whatever it is, right? Something really vivid, visual, sensory that we can really wrap our minds around as we read your essay. A powerful quotation. I would really only use this strategy if you're using a quotation that's unexpected and engaging. Don't just pick the first quote that pops up on Brainy Quote or something like that that's about your topic. And remember, it depends on your essay. So if your essay is very academic in tone, then maybe you want to have a quotation from a scholar or some sort of influential figure in that field. But for a lot of essays, even if they're very academic essays, you might have a quotation from a friend of yours. You might have a quotation from a novel or from a movie, from a meme. It could really be from anything, depending on the type of essay that it is. If you pick a quotation that really is like a gut punch to the reader, if you're writing a personal narrative essay, say, maybe something that somebody said to you at one point that was really powerful and stuck with you, that could be a great way of pulling the reader in. Of course, you're going to have to relate it to your topic. A startling fact, I would really only use this if you've done some research on the fact using the library databases, and if it's a fact that's interesting, unexpected, right? If it's an obvious fact, then this is not a good place to use it. The significance of the work. So this really works nicely if you're talking about some sort of text, if you're talking about literature, or you're talking about a book or a poem or a movie or a sculpture or something. It can be very easy to fall into cliche with this. I would avoid using the word significance, even though I have it listed here to tell you the strategy. I would avoid announcements like this work is significant because, or this is important because. It tends to sound a little bit kind of juvenile or even like it's been written by AI. You need to make that significance implicit, or you need to talk about it without using those exact terms. This is a hard one to do in a way that doesn't become kind of cliche. A broader explanation of the situation. So sometimes your topic needs some background information. If that background information truly is really compelling and interesting, like a current debate about a situation or a policy or something like that, you want to make sure that when you're introducing it, at least the first sentence is pulling us in before you go too much into the explanation. So if you use this strategy, I might pair it with something like an anecdote or a vivid description. Ask a question, but an unexpected question. Think about the assignment. If you're in an English 101 class, think about the assignment that the instructor is giving you. If everyone is asked to write about why they're going to college or something like that, if you ask kind of an obvious question, like, why should we go to college for a prompt like that? That's probably something a lot of people are doing. It's going to fall flat. So I would really only use this strategy if your question truly is original, maybe even a provocative question. And generally, you want to steer clear of yes or no questions because the reader just answers yes or no in their head and moves on, right? Like something like, have you ever considered going to college? The answer is either yes or no. And it doesn't really leave the reader thinking about your topic, doesn't really plant a seed. So I would only use this if your question is really thoughtful, interesting, and truly subjective. So not a yes or no type of question, but a question that really forces us to stop and think. Challenge a common interpretation. This is great if your essay is going to be challenging the conventional wisdom about your topic. You're going to disagree with what critics say about a book or a theory or a policy, whatever your topic is. This can be a great way to pull the reader in. So start with what the conventional wisdom is and then talk about how you have a totally different point of view, or maybe even a slightly different point of view. Reference a current debate. This works really well if you're writing for a poli-sci class or something like that, or even if you're writing for a literature class in which critics are debating and writing about what a text might mean or what their argument about the text might be. So you could reference a couple different debates or interpretations about your particular topic, and then of course when you get to your thesis, you make your argument, your stance on these debates clear. Another great strategy I love is an unusual metaphor or simile. Sometimes I think people steer clear of using figurative language in essays, especially if they're academic essays. But we shouldn't do that. We should use these tools, whether it's a simile, a creative comparison using like or as, or a metaphor, some sort of unexpected comparison of two things that really draws the reader in. So don't shy away from figurative language, even for an academic essay. A couple of general tips. So think about what other people are doing and do something different, depart from the expected. Consider the topic and your audience. Obviously, you want to speak with your instructor. If you're writing an essay for, say, a biology class, there might be different conventions, right? They might not want you to use a personal anecdote. So consider the topic, the audience, the prompt. Start with something concrete, especially if your topic is abstract. A lot of famous writers talk about how when your topic is big, you actually go small. So if you're writing about the horrors of war, that is such an epic, important, vast topic that you should actually zoom in as in the most particular way that you can, right? Write about a sock on the side of the road. Write about something concrete, something tangible, something sensory, and focus on something that's actually small. Same thing if you're writing about love, right? That's a huge topic. See if you can focus on a note left on a Post-it, right? Something really concrete to pull the reader in. Avoid excessive background or plot. For some essays, like a research paper, you might have to give a fair amount of background. That might be a good idea for your first body paragraph. If you're writing about a short story or about a novel, you want to avoid excessive plot summary because that doesn't really engage the reader in the hook. Avoid sweeping statements. So we want to avoid vast generalities, right? Like since the dawn of time or throughout human history. I think those are okay to use if you're really going to say something kind of surprising. But if you're going to say something that everyone kind of knows is a given, then I would avoid them. And then, like I said before, when you're asking questions, if you are asking questions, make sure they're truly thoughtful and maybe questions that the reader has not considered before. And the last tip is consider the sentence structure and syntax, right? Is it a complex sentence, a complex compound sentence? Is it a short sentence? Is it a long sentence? Why are some words used before others? Is it an active voice? Is it in passive voice? This is really an important sentence in your essay. And again, your hook could be a sentence, 2 sentences, 4 sentences. There isn't a limit, but really give some thought, especially to your first few sentences in your essay. Some readers say that the first lines of a book tell us everything we need to know about the book. Another famous example of this would be Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, one of the most famous lines in English literature. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Basically, everyone believes that a rich man must want to get married. That's what the quotation is saying. That book is actually that sentence is actually a microcosm for what the entire book is going to be about. And it also moves from the universal to the most specific, beginning with truth universally acknowledged, down to wife. And some of the quotations I showed you from earlier in this video also are telling you something or revealing something about the themes or the plot or the big ideas of the book. You can do the same thing with your essay. Please let me know if you have any questions. I hope this helped.